Food prices were rising even before the war in Ukraine, hurt by pandemic related disruptions on top of devastation from more frequent and severe weather catastrophes, with nearly 1 in 3 people worldwide didn't have access to adequate food in 2021, with estimates of up to 828 million people in the world facing hunger. And recent news reports remind us that just a few months ago, President Joe Biden warned food shortages are going to be real. And he may just be onto something for the first time in a long time. While Americans should take note, already food banks are turning up empty shelves and food prices are out of control. These are both very bad signs. And the real question is if the Biden administration's disastrous handling of the still unsolved baby formula shortage is any indication of how the administration will handle nationwide food shortages, does he have a legitimate plan to mitigate potential food shortages that we soon may face? Now, logic would dictate that supporting America's farmers would be the first step. To not do so would basically be like hearing a thunderstorm coming and not closing your windows, or trying to ride a bicycle but forgetting to actually pedal. And it appears that Biden has taken the second route and reminds us we're in a crisis right now, while ignoring requests from John Boyd Jr., the president of the National Black Farmers Association, who warned back in May. And now in June, he has called out Biden, or previously in June, has called out Biden for promising a meeting last year to discuss inflation, but has still yet to follow up. Meanwhile, American farmers are seeing increased costs across the board, from fertilizer and pesticides to equipment repairs and seasonal labor. Diesel costs are through the roof, and amid Biden's war on American energy. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in one of America's most widely used weed killers, is up 250% from a year earlier, in part because of supply chain challenges Biden promised to fix. And according to another survey, the Purdue University CME Group AG Economy Barometer from April, 30% of farmers struggle to get herbicides. 27% farm machinery parts, 26% fertilizers, and 17% insecticides. They're just making it harder and harder for farmers to produce. And all this could mean less food when crops are harvested in the long term. And American farmers are getting financially beat down as a result. A recent study from Texas A&M University found farmers' profits will drop by 60% in 2022, in part because of higher input costs. Can you imagine taking a 60% pay cut and not quitting your job? There's no way I would work for 60% less doing the same amount of work. While financial incentives to farm are disappearing, the question that everyone is asking is who's supposed to step in and carry the torch or pick up the plow? Distraught mothers who haven't been able to get baby formula, praying that Biden or anyone in his administration can solve this problem, while Biden actions prove the point that we are pretty much in this fight alone, or even worse, fighting against him, at a time when farming and food production is an absolute top priority. The Biden administration just last month proposed what essentially boils down to more expensive weed control. Weed control reform that farmers warn would only hurt them and their crop yields even further. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine compounded the problem by temporarily cutting the world off from a breadbasket that supplied roughly a quarter of the globe's wheat, plus sunflower oil and major cooking oil. Sanctions on Russia, which accounts for roughly a fifth of the world's potash, drove prices of that key fertilizer even higher, threatening farmers' yields for next year's crop. Not good news. And according to the United Nations Secretary General, the result is an unprecedented global hunger crisis. The UN's food price index for a basket of commodities hit records this year, rising 62% in June. In the U.S., food prices rose 10.4% in June from a year earlier, the biggest increase in over 40 years. Joyce Chang, chair of global research at JP Morgan, said, Food security is a problem that won't go away next year. Investments in technology by agricultural equipment, seed, and fertilizer companies that hope to boost food production have been on the rise. These companies are using new technology to make food production more efficient. Similar to companies like Pfizer and Moderna, they could ease the fallout from a global crisis by helping get more food out of less land and also boost their profits along the way. Farm and food companies are harnessing new technology to make food production more efficient. For example, Deere and CNH Industrial are using drones, robotics, and navigation systems along with data analytics to make farmers more productive. Agriculture technology has been booming with the growth of innovation, attracting $10.5 billion dollars from venture capital last year. The pandemic, war in Ukraine, and climate change illustrate the vulnerability of food supplies, further threatening to keep prices elevated for years to come. That inflicts more pain on those already battling hunger in the US and around the world. It also complicates central bankers' inflation fights by raising the risk of recession and strains the finances of nations in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And according to the UN, 52% of all agricultural land is degraded or suffering from soil erosion that results in declining crop yields and loss of biodiversity. If current practices continue, the UN has warned that an additional area equal to the size of South America will suffer the same fate by 2050. The head of the Global Thematic Research Team at Bank of America said the world is now using nature 1.7 times faster than Earth's biocapacity can regenerate. And he says that based on current trends, that will increase to a 2 times multiple by 2030. As people scramble for food and the cost of living soars, the financial pressure is turning into political unrest in places like Sri Lanka and Peru, where the risk of unrest from food inflation is higher than it's been in years. Higher food prices are already straining food banks in the U.S. as more people line up for help. According to the USDA, U.S. households on average spend 10.3% of their budgets on food. Food price spikes are even more painful for low-income countries where food makes up roughly 45% of household income on average. Shoring up domestic food supply is a priority, but in some cases, it's coming at the expense of free trade and just making shortages and price spikes even worse. About 60% of global food production comes from 5 countries: China, the US, India, Brazil, and Argentina. While simultaneous shocks to grain production are becoming increasingly more likely in years to come because of extreme weather events, with the probability doubling by 2030 because of risks to corn, rice, and soy production, and these crops are hurt more by the more extreme weather patterns created by climate change. Addressing these issues will take a concerted effort by nations and their leaders around the globe. The elite, World Economic Forum. It is estimated that roughly 60% more food from 2010 levels will be needed to feed the world's projected population of 9.7 billion by the year 2050. And a part of the solution lies in more efficient farming. Companies like farm equipment giants Deere and CNH Industrial have a renewed focus on global food supply increase to meet demand. Their challenge? To boost efficiency by radically changing agriculture as arable land is depleted by more frequent droughts, wildfires, and floods. Deere has more than 6,000 dealers in over 100 countries and has made the company very profitable, allowing it to spend $1.5 billion dollars a year on research and development. This is gaining them a technological edge, and they are making investments in precision spraying and planting equipment to help farmers save money on chemicals, implementing the use of robotic tractors more and more to reduce soil compression, which makes crops more vulnerable and requires more irrigation and fertilizer, with the prospect of self-driving trucks in the field by the end of this year. Deere's rival, CNH Industrial, is an even cheaper option for the farmers, and the company, which sells brands such as Case and New Holland after merging with Fiat Industrial in 2013. But in the near term, fertilizer prices are one of the major worries looming over farmers. ICL Group is a producer of phosphate and potash fertilizers instead of the natural gas dependent nitrogen that can be subject to the volatility of gas prices, especially in the wake of the war in Ukraine. And experts expect ICL's sales to hit 10.3 billion this year, up from 7 billion last year, boosted by soaring fertilizer prices. Benchmark potash prices are up 150% this year, in part due to sanctions on Russia, which, along with Belarus, accounts for 38% of global production. I'm going to keep my eye on this company because Wall Street expects the company to earn $1.82 a share in 2022, and that's up from about 60 cents a share in 2021. Their shares are trading at roughly 5 times estimated 2022 earnings. But honestly, let's hope the looming food shortage crisis that Biden says will be real doesn't turn out to be the baby formula or the Biden baby formula shortage 2.0. The baby formula shortage has shown that when it comes to matters of hunger, potentially life and death, the Biden administration just can't seem to devote the energy required to act swiftly and effectively to protect the American people. A potential food shortage would be the different in that it's arguably been instigated by the Biden administration. In 2020, Biden did say, after all, we don't have a food shortage problem, we have a leadership problem. So if this crisis were indeed to hit American shores, who would be to blame?